Does its thing.
Welcome to the Liberty Collaborative, where the past meets the present in the fight for freedom. We uncover the roots of liberty, spotlight the people who shaped it, and explore what it takes to preserve it today. If you're ready to think deeper, stand stronger, and act with purpose, you're in the right place. It's playing what matters most.
And good morning, everybody. You are listening to Liberty Collaborative Podcast. And we are running behind today because technical difficulties do happen in the real world. So we're also down a few members today, which we'll talk about in a second here. But K. Carl, thanks for jumping on the call today.
No, not a problem, man.
Being here, it is good to see you. And nice looking shirt. I do like it.
That's right. Freddie Douglass commemorative bicentennial. You can't celebrate liberty in America. It don't have Freddie Douglass part of the conversation, in my opinion. Matter of fact, that makes you legitimate.
That is true. So just to give everybody a rundown, Chris and Mike Hancock, who are normally here, Chris Coyle, he's on a fishing trip up in Canada. I believe he's going for trout today. And Mr. Hancock is doing great. He had, we'll just chalk it up to an incident. I don't want to get too much into his personal life on here, but he is, according to Mrs. Hancock, he is doing great. So we are glad that he is doing better. So today we're gonna
stay strong, brother.
Yes, absolutely. We're gonna talk America 250th because it's not just about 250 years of this country. It's this country actually declared its independence from England 250 years ago, and there was a lot that went into creating this document, the Declaration of Independence, and those who continue to this day still push forward the agenda of a republic, not a pure democracy, an actual constitutional republic. So with that, I know K. Carl has a lot to talk about because Douglas did write a 4th of July speech, correct? Is that what it was called?
What to the slave is the 4th of July. Yeah. That's his famous speech. And a lot of people have not read it. I encourage you to read it because if you don't read it for yourself, you will be misled by people who try to mismanage or misrepresent what actually Douglas did in that speech. This is when I was a Democrat. What the left would do, they would say that Douglas criticized the United States, he hated America, and they referred to that speech. Well, when you go back and read that speech for yourself, that's not true. And so there's a word I want to use called a double reversal. It's not a sophisticated term. Okay. A double reversal is when a speaker goes in one direction, he covers a point, then all of a sudden he pivots and take you in another direction emotionally. It's called a reverse. That's one reversal. What Douglas did, what I call a double reversal. So now the first thing about that speech is, if you go back and look, Douglas gave that speech on July 5th, not July 4th. Oh. And it was not on July 5th because of scheduling conflict. Because at that time, before the Civil War, a lot of blacks who were free, even those who were enslaved, voiced their disappointment in the United States, because at that time here you had people celebrating the 4th of July, but at that time you had 4 million blacks still in slavery, primarily in the South. So blacks, to show their disapproval or this being totally disenchanted with celebrating liberty, but you're not going to free 4 million blacks in slavery, they purposely celebrated Independence Day, the 4th of July, on July 5th. So starting off, Douglas went there, and when he accepted that speech, he didn't go there speaking on the 4th of July like they initially requested. He said, no, if I'm coming to speak, I'm going to speak on July 5th. Okay, to show his disagreement with the state, with the status quo, basically. And in that speech, what Douglas did, you got to break that in really 3 parts. He started off and he started praising the founding fathers. And think about it now. You have this Independence Day celebration. Doug gets up there and speak. He praises the founding fathers, their courage to fight tyranny and stand up for the God-given rights. I'm pretty sure people in that crowd were feeling very, very comfortable at that time. Then Doug has made his first pivot, his first reversal. After making them feel comfortable, he pivoted and he criticized them. He criticized America. He said, basically, you're hypocrites. He said, your flag is a sham. Your anthem is a sham. And then he said, what to the slave is your 4th of July? Because they want to celebrate on the 4th, and blacks didn't want to celebrate that because their fellow countrymen were in bondage. So he said, what to the slave is your 4th of July? So that was the first pivot. So after he made them feel comfortable, he praised the founding fathers. He called them basically hypocrites. I'm talking about the people in attendance there, the Americans. Then he pivoted again, which is his second reversal. He ended on a word of hope. What a lot of liberals do, they stop at the first pivot.
Right.
They don't get into the third pivot where he ended on hope. And in that document, he said the Constitution is a glorious liberty document.
Okay. I was going to ask that when
they don't cover that.
Right. Yeah. Because I was going to ask, because I know it's a statement he had made, but I wasn't sure if it was in that speech or if it was beforehand. And he does call
he said it many times. You probably read some other speeches too, but he also said in that speech, what to the slave is the 4th of July.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a double reversal. You're right. It is.
That's
and
right.
You're correct.
That double reversal is a powerful rhetorical way of getting your audience captivated into what you have to say. And then because he smacked them in the face after that first reversal, he smacked them in the face. They were comfortable. Just think emotionally what you're going through. You're comfortable. He's praising the founding fathers. Then all of a sudden you're saying, ouch. Uh-oh. Now he's criticizing us.
Right.
So you got these two mixed emotions going, and Douglas was great at that. And then the most powerful thing he did, basically what Douglas did, when I think of like Kaepernick kneeled, but Kaepernick didn't have a solution.
Right.
Douglas basically was kneeling to the flag, but he had a solution. He ended it on hope. That's the difference.
Right. And it's interesting how you bring it up, that the few times that have heard that speech referenced by, we'll call them the Democratic Socialists, because that seems to be what they are now.
And they're winning like crazy, aren't they? We got to talk about that.
We got to talk about that. That New York was true. They were steamrolled there. But you're right. They stop at that one point. They don't ever bring up the point that there's hope, that he talks about hope. And they, like normally, manipulate it to narrative to keep people looking at the boogeyman, as you like to put it, right?
That's right. Right.
And it's interesting because when you look at the Declaration of Independence, it does say we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And I think it was good on him to call it the hypocrisy of it, that, here's your document that says these people are all created equal, but yet they're still enslaved at this point. So
that's right.
The double reversal is pretty powerful when you look at it in that aspect.
Exactly right. Exactly right. I couldn't agree more, and it's well said. Yeah.
So, what else? I had a couple of the notes here. With everything that this experiment of this country has done, that I think a lot of times people get really comfortable in what they're doing, and they start to forget that freedom requires responsibility, and that self-government only works when citizens stay informed, whether that's at state, local, federal level. And I don't know, maybe not my area. I don't see a lot of it. Like, things happen and people are like, boy, where did that come from? How did that get built there? Or when did that change? And
maybe in our generation, but the younger folks, that's concerned because they don't recognize it.
Right.
We recognize it because we're taught civics. I say that, but they're not getting that today. And one thing you hit on earlier, I want to just chime in, is that we have to understand why we're celebrating this 250th birthday celebration. It's not because we're turning 250.
No, not at all.
That's not what we're celebrating. We're celebrating because you use the word exceptional, how the United States was an experiment
It is.
We're the first country that had in the Constitution where our rights come from God and not from a king or some group of individuals who's in charge. That was the experiment.
Right.
And that's the difference between Douglas and Karl Marx. Karl Marx believed that your rights come from government, and Frederick Douglass wrote and spoke about our rights come from God. Before government exists, and when government goes away, our rights stay in place.
Yep.
So that's the basic difference of Karl Marx and Frederick Douglass, and that's why when people say this great experiment, that's what they're talking about.
Correct. And the other thing I had a note here because I hear it all the time, though, especially in the news. Oh, it's a threat to our democracy, right? How many times did we hear that when Trump was running or any Republican? And America is a constitutional republic, not a pure democracy. In a republic, the people elect the representatives, and those representatives are bound by a written constitution that limits government power and protects the right of every citizen, including minorities. It's everybody. And now, apparently, I'm not a huge fan of the ruling from the Supreme Court, but birthright citizenship is a thing. So I guess they're going to keep those birthright tourism trips coming to the country. But,
yeah, whatever it takes for them to try to maintain that voter block.
Yeah, exactly. So those are just some of the things I wanted to touch on because I think a lot of this gets lost in the cookouts, the fireworks. Do you guys have good fireworks down in Georgia? Can you guys get like the good stuff down there?
Yeah, they got them on the roadside.
Yeah,
almost right now. It's probably on every intersection on highway, every exit you can find them. You can find one. Yeah, and sometimes there's some that last year round. They're open a year round.
Oh wow, yeah. Connecticut's a little more prude when it comes to fireworks. We have to take trips across several borders to get some of the good stuff. But yeah, I think a lot of this gets lost and people get so caught up in, oh, it's America's 250th birthday. But what that really means, like you said, is we wrote the Declaration of Independence. We sent that to England and we said, this is what's going to happen. We're done with you. And we're going to have a government by the people for the people. I have no idea what just dinged on my computer, but whatever. Not a problem. So do you want to talk about the socialist Democrats here for a minute? You want to pivot a little bit? And,
yeah, it's just the fact that they did very well.
They did extremely well.
And what do you think the reason why the victory? I was going to ask you that, kind of toss it up to you a little bit. What's your reason? What's your thoughts behind why they were so successful?
I looked at this a little bit because they knocked off incumbents, and it's very hard to knock off an incumbent when you're running an election. And I don't think the Democratic Party realizes how much power Mondami has. He is now the face of the Democratic Party, the Socialist Democrats. And I think the reason why they did so well is because what he says about socialism and how it's great for everybody and it's going to work here, even though it's never worked anywhere else, is that there's all this free stuff, rent freezes, free childcare, all these things that people that work struggle because the cost of living in this country is extremely high. I think that they don't realize, and they are the ones that voted for these individuals, realize the actual outcome of socialism, have probably never been to a socialist country, and don't realize what kind of ramifications this is going to have on our country. Should he, and I heard it this morning that him and Kamala had a conversation. So maybe they're going to run for office, which is a very scary thought. And now you have, even here in Connecticut, we have the governor being challenged by another Democrat running for governor. So there's going to be a primary. And now they're trying to see who can be more leftist. It's absolutely insane. So I think to answer your question, K. Carl, is the individuals that voted for him, or not him, but all the endorsed candidates that he endorsed, want that socialist mindset because for some reason it's been taught to them that socialism works, even though it hasn't worked anywhere that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I agree with that. And it's because, in my opinion, is that the messaging strategy of the Republican Party needs to improve greatly.
Oh, yeah.
And if you can articulate the difference between you and a socialist and you lose an election, that's a problem. Because most Americans don't want socialism. But because of maybe propaganda or just poor messaging strategy, people are not getting it. And also because people don't know the difference between, they don't know what socialism, which is a gateway to communism, really is. And I'm gonna do a selfless plug here. That's the one reason why we sat down and put this book together here, Douglas versus Marx: The Battle for America's Soul. And this book really explains it, that even though Karl Marx and Frederick Douglass never met, but they were both born in 1818. And they both looked at oppression throughout the world and came up with two separate, totally different worldviews on how to create human flourishing. I mean, for example, Karl Marx, of course, the father of communism, and Democrats, socialists are really students of Karl Marx.
Yep.
And they believe that government is the answer. And Douglas basically said, look, I've been told that once before by my slave master. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of you. And Douglas said in his first biography, when his slave master told him, said, Freddie, don't you worry about anything. I'm going to take care of you. Douglas realized then he better start learning how to read and write. That just didn't sound right.
Right.
So that's what's, and a lot of people don't know the contrast. They don't know the misery and the poverty that socialism, whenever Marxism was ever put in place during the 20th century, it has always failed. It has created misery, poverty, mass murders. It has never worked. But you look at the philosophy of Frederick Douglass, based on our rights coming from God, personal responsibility in terms of being responsible for yourself, right, that has created more human flourishing than any other economic system, to right, include Marxism. But we have to apply ourselves, and it takes understand where your rights come from. So I think the answer is once we start leveraging Frederick Douglass' liberty message to counter what Karl Marx had to say, I think people will finally wake up, because most folks don't get it. They never heard it. It reminds me of Thomas Sowell. Right. Thomas Sowell, the great conservative economist, in his younger day was a devout Marxist. And somebody asked him one day, well, what happened? Why you are a conservative now? He said, well, I finally heard the counter argument.
Right.
Most folks have never heard the counter argument, liberty message to Marxism. And they definitely haven't heard it through the lens and writings of Frederick Douglass. And once you read Douglass and contrast that with Marx, it will come perfectly clear. So in this book that I wrote, Douglass versus Marx: The Battle for America's Soul, it includes 31 debates of Karl Marx and Frederick Douglass are debating. The content of the debate is not something I made up. It's based on their actual writings and their beliefs. Because everything Karl Marx wrote about and talked about, Douglass wrote about it before the word Marxism was invented, because Douglass talked about slave master oppression. And he talked about the slave system. Well, that's what communism is. It's a slavery system. It's no different than that on the plantation. And so when Douglass wrote about his experience as a slave in his speech, The Nature of Slavery, he's basically talking about Marxism, and we have that documented evidence of what he had to say. Because one thing Douglass said, Aaron, what I did in the book, there's 31 debates, but there's a debate called debate number 0. Debate 0 is this is the fundamental debate.
Right.
Once you understand this debate, it will help you understand why free speech, religious liberty, the right to keep and bear arms, why Douglass and Marx differ. And that debate is, where do our rights come from? And Douglass said our rights come from God. And Karl Marx tried to get rid of God. Matter of fact, he called religion the opium of the masses. He tried to eliminate religion.
Yep.
And so in this debate, I'm here to tell you, Douglass crushes Marx in every debate. Not because we rigged it that way, not because we diminished anything Karl Marx had to say, simply because Douglass was right, and not just he was politically right, but this being 2026, we can look back into the 20th century and we can see that Marxism has failed everywhere.
It has.
That's why Douglass won, but that's the truth of it. So thank God we have this literary legacy of Frederick Douglass, and that's what's so key. Once you understand Douglass's arguments, game changer. That's what the book does. A lot of folks know a few quotes about Douglass, but just because you know a few quotes, that don't mean you understand his arguments. And so they're arguing, they're debating, and it's based on what they have to say, what they wrote, and what they spoke on. Nothing is made up. Matter of fact, in the end of the book, there's an extensive about 13 pages of source documents. Where do we get this information from? When Douglass said called the Constitution a glorious liberty document, where did he get that from? When Marx called religion the opium of the masses, where did that come from? So, well researched, I think. And this book is the first and only book of its kind. Nobody has ever put Frederick Douglass and Karl Marx in the same room and introduced them to one another properly and let them have at it.
And it is a good book. We have it here, and we're actually my mother, when she was up, started reading it to my youngest daughter Morgan, and now we started putting that into. You're supposed to go to summer school, and she's like, Dad, I just want to do try homeschooling stuff. So that's part of the curriculum. We're reading a story every other day just to start instilling that message in her, because
that's key.
In public school, they get indoctrinated with stuff. And another point to all this, K. Carl, it's interesting that you bring this up with the book, and I'm sure there's those that are listening that say, "Oh, you guys are crazy. Socialism is the greatest thing since sliced bread, what have you." And to that, I always ask people, if this country's so bad, if we have kings here, and the orange man is ruining everything, and this country is terrible, why do so many people come to this country, rich and poor, regardless of their economic status?
Right.
Still come here because of the opportunity and what this amazing country has to offer.
Well, you don't see people risking life and limb to get to Venezuela.
No.
They're getting out of Venezuela.
Exactly.
They came out of these socialist communist countries, and they come in here because of the experiment that was put in place. And so, you're exactly right. And one thing you mentioned before, what you're doing with your daughter, and that is totally admirable, because we cannot trust our institutions to pass on our American way of our culture, because our institutions, education is one, has been overtaken by the left. So you're not going to get the education system to bring in a Douglass and tell the truth of Douglass. They're going to bring in Marxism. So what you're doing as a parent is what we must do. If you're going to make sure, I thought about this, what we do as parents, we get our children ready for the world. Especially when I go to college, we set the dorm up, we buy stuff for the dorm room, all these things. But there's one thing that's parents we're not preparing them for. We got to prepare them for the ideological battle that's going to take place once they walk on that college campus and get in front of that liberal professor and be challenged about their faith and about their conservative values. If we don't prepare them before they walk into the classroom or walk on campus, they're going to come back after the semester and start talking to you about systematic oppression.
Yep.
So the question is, how you prepare them? Selfless plug again. Put this in their hands. Douglass versus Marx, The Battle for America's Soul. And it is a book where I have 8 grandchildren. They're all being homeschooled. I had to give each one of them a copy of the book, because you have 31 debates. After every debate, there is a reflection, the moral of the story, talking points. These are talking points you can use in your discussions with people you come in contact with. When that Marxist comes to your kitchen dinner table and you want to set it straight, get them on the right path, there's some talking points there. There are discussion questions. There are at least 5 questions after every debate, and there are guided solutions to those questions. So it's really zero prep time if you want to deliver it as a class, because it's all there. So it's basically a curriculum.
Now, is that on the kcarl.company.site?
The book is, yeah. And okay. The book is Douglass versus Marx, The Battle for America's Soul. And what I've learned over the years, Aaron, is this. Most folks don't see Douglass as a philosopher. as a major thought leader when it comes to liberty. When people talk about Karl Marx, they say, "Oh, he's a philosopher from Germany," but they don't say that about Frederick Douglass. And Douglass wrote probably more than what. Matter of fact, Karl Marx cherry picked Douglass' philosophy on humanity because Karl Marx, based on my understanding of some biographies I read, Karl Marx was a subscriber to Douglass's North Star newsletter.
Interesting.
So it's so Douglass is the answer to save this nation. Douglass has always been a solution. I think what we have to do, we have to rediscover Frederick Douglass. And keep in mind that all the claims that Democrat socialists espouse, Douglass wrote about that.
Yep.
There's nothing new under the sun.
No, there's not. And to go back real quick before we wrap up here today, with the college stuff, you are 100% right. I know when Charlie Kirk was assassinated, we did a vigil here, and we had a lot of Turning Point and UConn students and students who had recently graduated came, and it was sickening, I guess is probably the best way to put it, to hear how many of them had conservative values, and they had to hide that. They had to be a closet conservative, for lack of better description, because if they came out and spoke how they really felt, or if they really tried to debate things in class through a paper or what have you, they basically were told, you're not going to pass my class. You're done. And
did I ever tell you the KJ story?
No, I don't think so.
KJ is a young man that attends a junior college right here in Alabama, in the Birmingham area. KJ got a copy of my book about a year ago, 6 months ago. About 6 months ago, I sent him an advanced copy. So KJ had been reading the book. In one of the debates in the book, Karl Marx and Frederick Douglass are debating the U.S. Constitution and the 3/5 clause. Mm-hmm. And so by KJ had read the 3/5 clause, he knew what Frederick Douglass said about it because that's in the book. So in his history class, the professor got in front of the classroom and said, the Constitution is a pro-slavery document, and blacks are 3/5 of an individual seen by the founding fathers because of the 3/5 clause, that black folks are 3/5 of a person. KJ had been reading the book. KJ knew the truth. KJ pushed back. He's a sophomore in college, pushed back against the teacher in a respectful way, won the argument with his teacher because he couldn't deny what Frederick Douglass said.
Right.
Won the argument with his teacher, and he won the classroom.
That's fantastic.
Because now these young kids who saw KJ stand up what he believed in and articulated the truth, these other kids in the classroom, they wanted to know the truth, and we gave several of them copies of the book.
Nice.
Because when they showed interest, so let's just give them a copy. So. But imagine though, because when I was in college, I was taught the same thing, that black folks are 3/5 of human being, and I sat there and I accepted it, and I believed that for the longest time. But if I had something like this in my hand where I knew the truth, based on what Frederick Douglass had to say, game changer. I don't know what that history professor is doing now, but I don't think he's going to be saying that again.
No,
but that's my point. Is we have to equip. To push back against socialism and Marxism, we have to equip our young people or anyone with the liberty message and the arguments of Frederick Douglass. And you mentioned Turning Point. Just imagine, I'm just thinking here, if Turning Point could focus their liberty message around Frederick Douglass, you're not going. If they did that, how can you call somebody a racist when Frederick Douglass is the focal point of the liberty message? Then on these kids on these college campuses, you put this book in their hands. So now they got this book that's going to equip them with knowledge. Because one thing about the book, Aaron, the book is not a history book.
Right. No, it's not.
A history book tells you what happened. This is a tactical manual for liberty. It tells you how to win the arguments based on Frederick Douglass's liberty message. Because Douglass wrote about free speech, religious liberty, the right to keep and bear arms, the role of government, the U.S. Constitution, all the equality, all the claims of Marxism, what they're trying to do in this country, and primarily what they want to do first, they're going to try to get rid of God.
Yep.
That's what they want to do. And Douglass talked about that. And I can go on forever. Douglass said the first aim of slavery is to separate a man or a woman from God. That's the first aim of Marxism. because under Marxism, they cannot afford you to have homage to something that's above them. They want you to see them as God, not that there's a God above them. That's why they got to remove it, God out of the way, God with a capital G, and then get you to focus on government, where the government becomes your God. And they want you to bow down to the altar, not of Almighty God, but to the altar of the Almighty government. That's the difference. And Douglas wrote about those things.
Yeah, well said. Well, I think we should leave it right there. I don't think it gets much better than that, K. Carl. It was. I
don't think it gets better than that. Better than that is a T-shirt I have on.
That's it. That's it.
This is our commemorative Frederick Douglass T-shirt. America's 250. If you're going to talk about liberty, U.S. Constitution, and want to preserve America, you must make Frederick Douglass an integral part of the conversation, because he's a former slave that spoke gloriously about the founding fathers and the Constitution. The left can't handle that. We got to leverage it.
That's right. And don't let them fool you with the 4th of July speech he did either.
That's right.
There's a whole second part to it that they don't talk about. All right, folks. Well, with that being said, we're hitting our 30-minute mark. Hopefully next week we will have the whole crew back here. Hopefully Mike Hancock is feeling better, and Chris Coyle catches some bangers of a fish up there in Canada. I think he was going for salmon and trout today. So
he must be doing well. I haven't heard from him.
Yeah, well, he's been off the grid. I guess he had no cell signal. I got a quick phone call today, and that was it. So for those of you who are watching or listening, we are here every Thursday, normally from 10:30 to 11. Today we had some technical difficulties, but we worked through it. We'll be back next week. Thank you for listening to The Right Vibe. And as always, don't forget.
Don't eat me, Hillary Clinton.
Thanks for joining us on the Liberty Collaborative. If today's episode lit a fire or gave you clarity, share it and be part of the movement. Subscribe.